So, for months now, the whole internet has been circling this story from a safe, sanitized distance, and folks, if you already thought the D4vd case couldn't sink any lower into the sewer, buckle in, because tonight I'm walking you through the sickest self-written confession any accused killer has ever typed into an iPhone, and by the time I'm done, you're going to understand why the prosecution barely has to work a 9-to-5 to bury this man. His name is David Anthony Burke. The world knows him as D4vd, and if you don't recognize that face on the courtroom sketch yet, trust me, you will by the end of this. Because what just leaked out of this preliminary hearing is not evidence. It is an obituary. It is a fully drafted, digitally time-stamped, iCloud synced obituary that David typed himself and handed to the LAPD on a silver platter. And I promise you, by the time I read out the 2 words D4vd, allegedly, chose to name his crimes, you'll sit there wondering how a human being with a functioning frontal lobe could be this stupid. 2 words. 2 syllables each. Operation Awesome. Yeah. Operation Awesome. That's what David Anthony Burke, allegedly, named his plan to run off with a 14-year-old child. Not a nickname. Not an inside joke. An operation. And listen, before we peel back the first layer of this thing, y'all have to sit with that, because it takes a very specific breed of narcissist to look at what you're plotting, the abduction, the interstate flight, the fake identities, the marriage in Italy, the whole nauseating package, and decide, you know what, this deserves a code name. This deserves branding. This deserves a logo. Something is structurally broken inside this man's skull, and I don't say that lightly. I say that because the texts I'm about to read are not the ramblings of a confused kid who fell into something ugly. These are the meticulous, giddy, self-congratulatory notes of a grown adult male who understood exactly what he was doing, wrote it down anyway, and hit send on an iPhone that Apple gladly handed straight to the district attorney. Folks, let's get into why this case is not going to end with anything less than the walls of a California prison closing on David Anthony Burke for the rest of his natural life. I have gone through every page of these leaked exchanges, cross-checked the timeline with the coroner's April 2025 window, mapped every named accomplice, and I'm telling you right now, this isn't a trial, this is a formality. The paperwork is already written. Alright, pulling the thread. Before we dive into the group chat from hell, y'all have to realize what most commentary channels are getting wrong. This is not just a case about one dumb celebrity making one catastrophic decision on Valentine's Day. This is about a network. This is about a driver named Sheldon who, apparently, was locked in enough to volunteer to chauffeur a grown man to pick up a child. This is about D4vd's mother, who, according to the texts themselves, allegedly knew. This is about Celeste's own household, where the timeline shows conversations, disappearances, and reappearances that make you wonder who exactly was closing their eyes and for how long. And that's before we get to David himself, sitting in that courtroom with the 1,000-yard stare half the internet is misreading as remorse. It's not remorse. Remorse takes a soul. What you're looking at, in that sketch, is a man who finally understood, at long last, that his own thumbs typed the eulogy. Let's back up. The court filings and the leaked spreadsheets, and yes, there is a spreadsheet, because the prosecution literally organized D4vd's text messages into a scrollable, color-coded, highlight-ready evidentiary document, pick up around Valentine's Day of what would have been the runaway attempt. David is writing to Celeste about a plan to extract her from her family home. Not visit. Not date. Extract. He tells her, in his own words, that if she can't fit all her belongings into her bags, don't worry, he'll just buy her a third Birkin. For those who don't obsess over designer handbags, a Birkin is not a purse. A Birkin is a 5-figure minimum status symbol. We are talking about a grown man showering a 14-year-old with hardware most adults will never touch, using those bags as bribes to coax her out of her own parents' house. That is not romance. That is not love. That is textbook grooming, wrapped in Hermes leather. And when Celeste hesitates, when she says no to the garbage bag method D4vd actually suggested, a phrase I refuse to unpack because it makes my skin crawl, David escalates. He tells her the third Birkin is on the way. He tells her not to worry. He tells her he's got it. And then he drops the name Sheldon. Me and Sheldon will be there at 11:50. Me and Sheldon. Bruh, who is Sheldon? Sheldon is not being charged. Sheldon is not being paraded on TMZ. Sheldon is a shadow figure who, allegedly, agreed to drive a man to pick up a runaway child, and Sheldon is walking around free while D4vd is contemplating chalk outlines from a cell. If I'm the LAPD, I'm not sleeping until Sheldon is in a windowless room with a lawyer he can't afford. That's not a suggestion. That's a criminal justice necessity. The knock on his door is coming. Hold that thought, because it gets worse. If you thought the runaway plot was the ugly part, wait until you hear the pattern that pops up over and over across the entire message chain. The number one word, the number one topic, the number one obsession running through David Anthony Burke's texts to this child is not romance. It is not affection. It is not even the sick performance of teenage flirtation. It is pregnancy. It is family planning. This grown adult male is talking to a 14-year-old about baby bumps, twins, adoption thresholds, clear visions for how they'll build a family. He is talking about medications she took, about whether the first pill worked, about whether her body is behaving the way he expected. This is a man who wanted a child from a child. Let that sit on your chest for a moment. Because that single fact, that repeating, drumbeat obsession with reproduction, is what makes this case not a tragedy of impulse but a documented, premeditated, long-term project. That's not obsession. That's ideology. Sources close to the case whisper that when investigators first opened these files, veteran detectives, men and women who have processed decades of California's worst, had to step out of the room. Not because they hadn't seen it before. Because they had never seen it this well documented by the perpetrator himself. That's the tier of stupidity we are working with here. Y'all, this dumb man wrote his own indictment. He wrote it in real time. He wrote it in emojis and clapping stickers. He wrote it in GIFs. He wrote it while, allegedly, buying business credit cards so that everything he purchased for this child could be filed as a tax write-off. Clothes, food, whatever she wanted. All of it, allegedly, run through a limited liability company that will now be forensically autopsied by IRS agents who work faster than any homicide detective on Earth. Because if there's one thing America's federal apparatus does not tolerate, it is a business expense that reads like a grooming ledger. Once the IRS pulls that thread, D4vd's problems multiply exponentially. We move to June. Celeste is texting D4vd. She says her body is itchy. He responds, in a moment that will be read out loud in a courtroom, to a jury, at full volume, that his own body parts are itchy too. They joke. They flirt. They send gifts. She tells him she's going to shower. He tells her to wash certain regions of her body. She responds that certain things were up inside her, that she feels dirty. And I'm going to stop right there, because there is no journalistic framing that makes reading these easier. All you need to know is this: a 21-year-old man, whose face was on Fortnite promotional material, whose songs were on billions of streams, whose album cover dropped days after Celeste's estimated date of death according to the coroner, was texting a middle school-aged girl about the anatomy of the aftermath. And the label. And the manager. And the tour promoters. And the streaming platforms. And every single adult in D4vd's professional orbit was either oblivious, or worse, aware, and profiting anyway. And then, folks, because D4vd cannot help himself, because he is genuinely, cosmically, tragically stupid, he texts her, I feel like we're really good at the word. The word. The word he can't even type in full because some part of his prefrontal cortex knows the FBI is listening. And what does Celeste respond? She says of course you feel that way. She's 14. She has no other frame of reference. She doesn't know what she's supposed to feel. She only knows what he taught her. And that's the part that breaks me every time I reread this transcript. That's the part that makes it impossible to view D4vd's cold courtroom stare as anything other than the face of a man who has finally understood he trained his own victim into a witness. That's the whole tragedy in one sentence. He built her frame of reference and then he panicked when she started using it. Now, hold on. The timeline gets darker. Fast forward inside the same thread, and D4vd is planning international travel. August 11th, Vegas booked. Trump Hotel. Because of course. Because if you're going to allegedly commit a federal offense across state lines with a minor, you might as well do it in a building that comes preloaded with security cameras and a subpoena-ready hotel registry. Celeste asks him how much his dumb self paid. D4vd laughs it off. And then, this is the line that turned my stomach the first time I read it, David tells her the plan. For your vacation. Slide back to grab the rest of her documents. Dip out of the country. Get married in Italy. Italy. Italy has a lower age of consent than California. Italy has bureaucratic loopholes. Italy has, according to certain interpretations of family court law that I am absolutely not endorsing but am absolutely acknowledging exist, a legal architecture that a determined predator could exploit if he arrived with the right paperwork and enough cash. David Anthony Burke was allegedly planning to use those loopholes. He was allegedly planning to marry this child on foreign soil, wait out the statute, and return to the United States when she was of age, and then, presumably, cash in on the reconciliation arc, the redemption tour, the "we knew each other for years and finally we can be public" media rollout. That's not romance. That's not naivety. That is a strategy. It is a spreadsheet. It is Operation Awesome. The accomplice list is not a theory. The accomplice list is arithmetic. And listen, the detectives, God bless them, don't even have to earn overtime. All they need is a whiteboard, a marker, and the leaked message log. Every text lines up with a corresponding physical movement. Every "we can finally make it happen without the police and posters" corresponds to a specific week when LAPD, allegedly, had reached out to David's team about an underage girl in his social media pictures. Every "I can pay you and give you credit cards" corresponds to a documented business filing in the state of California. It is, and I mean this literally, a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle that assembled itself before the box was even opened. D4vd did the LAPD's job for them. He drew the picture on the box, he labeled the corners, he sorted the edge pieces, and then he mailed the whole thing to Parker Center gift wrapped. Now, before we push deeper, I have to pause on the detail most coverage is glossing over, the part that turns this from a horror story into a horror story with accomplices. D4vd's mother. Read the messages carefully and you'll find a moment where Celeste asks whether David's mother is aware of what the two of them have been doing physically. And David, without hesitation, responds that his mother thinks the first thing they will do the next time they see each other is exactly the thing Celeste is describing. Read that again. His mother thought that. His mother knew. His mother allegedly greenlit it. And that woman, as of the date of this recording, has not been questioned publicly, has not been subpoenaed publicly, has not been named in any charging document I can find on the docket. Why? Somebody explain to me why. Because if my son were 21 and I found out he was planning Operation Awesome with a 14-year-old, I would drag him to the police station by his earlobe before dinner. That is not a bad parent. That is an accomplice. And the same question applies, gently and with respect for a grieving family, to Celeste's own household. Not to accuse anyone, but to ask, out loud, how a child ran away, came back, ran away again, and returned home enough times to have a documented pattern, and no adult intervention succeeded in breaking the cycle. Every one of those homes was a checkpoint. Every checkpoint failed. That is a systemic collapse, and the district attorney's office has to reckon with all of it, not just with the man in the sketch. If we walk out of this trial with only D4vd convicted, we will not have prevented the next Celeste. We will have simply moved the next David one street over. Now we get to what the internet has been calling the Plan B messages. D4vd, in these leaked exchanges, references Plan B, the emergency contraceptive, the way most people reference groceries. He mentions the first Plan B video is gone. Video. He filmed her. He filmed her with Plan B, and he was mad that the recording did not save. He asks Celeste if she has a copy somewhere. She says no. Now think about what that implies. Because if there is a first Plan B video, there is a second one. There is possibly a third. There is possibly a library. And that library, if it exists, is either sitting in an iCloud backup that Apple is about to hand over under warrant, or it is sitting on a hard drive that David Anthony Burke was not smart enough to destroy. Sources close to the case whisper that forensic imaging of his devices is already complete. The prosecution isn't showing their whole hand at the preliminary hearing. They're holding it. They're waiting for trial. They're going to walk into that courtroom with a USB stick that ends the argument in one motion. And when that USB stick is unsealed in open court, folks, every single stream of D4vd's music is going to evaporate off every platform on the planet inside 48 hours. And this is the part where D4vd's own words start collapsing his defense before his lawyers even open their mouths. Because throughout the leaks, David refers to a repost plan, a SB pose about you concept, apparently a fantasy where he would publicly hint at his relationship with Celeste through carefully staged photographs. He tells her the pictures need to be blurry, because otherwise the internet will recognize her hands. Her hands. He is aware, at that exact moment, that publishing recognizable images of her would trigger a criminal investigation. He knows it. He types it. He hits send. In that single sentence, surely they remember what your hands look like, you're recognizable, he confesses to guilty knowledge in a way no jury on earth will need 3 deliberations to unpack. That is the sentence that closes the mens rea question before the prosecution even asks it. That is the sentence that makes the entire, he didn't know she was underage, defense impossible before it ever leaves a defense attorney's mouth. Folks, this is the closest thing to a self-serve conviction I have seen since I started covering these cases. This is a man who ran his own sting operation against himself. Hold that thought, because it gets sicker. Because David wasn't content to simply document his crimes. He also planned his exit strategy in writing. He tells Celeste, in one exchange, that once Operation Awesome is complete, they can finally make it happen without the police and posters. The police and posters. The missing persons flyers. He is, allegedly, waiting out the search for a missing 14-year-old, in writing, on an iPhone, over LTE, with a data plan billed to a Los Angeles zip code. Then, later, he tells her he can pay her, give her credit cards, handle every dollar of her expenses, all she has to do is get on a plane. Get on a plane. Get on a plane with a 14-year-old runaway with no documents, no chaperone, and no legal authority for a 21-year-old man to accompany her. And D4vd wrote it in the same tone most people would use to plan a weekend brunch. There is no version of this trial where these texts do not land. There is no jury instruction that will make them disappear. There is no motion to suppress that will bury them, because they were not obtained illegally, they were obtained from a phone the defendant himself handed over during the initial investigation, and once you hand over that phone, the game is over. That's the moment David Anthony Burke stopped being an artist and started being an exhibit. Exhibit A. Then Exhibit B. Then every letter of the alphabet, twice, until the marshals run out of stickers. Now, let me talk about the courtroom demeanor, because half the internet is misreading it. When D4vd sits in that chair with his afro slightly asymmetrical, his face slack, his eyes half-lidded and unfocused, that is not defiance. That is not calm. That is not a mafia don's cold poker face. That is dissociation. That is the neurological wallpaper of a man whose lawyers just finished briefing him on the scope of the evidence, whose plea deal window has, allegedly, already narrowed to something between 40 years and forever, and whose remaining decades will be measured in commissary receipts and mail from strangers. He is not tuning us out. He is tuning reality out. Because the alternative, actually processing what he did, is a psychological event no human being can walk through and remain standing. That expression, ironically, is one of the few honest ones D4vd has produced in years. Let me be clear. I do not advocate for the death penalty as a general policy. I think it's a blunt instrument. I think it's applied unevenly. I think it has ruined more innocent lives than it has closed guilty cases. But, and this is a rare, but for me, if California ever wanted to make a targeted exception, if California ever wanted to reserve a single seat on that final ride for one specific defendant whose paperwork so thoroughly incriminates himself that even the ACLU has to squint to find the angle, this would be the case. I'm not saying California will. I'm not saying California should. I'm saying, if you were building a hypothetical shortlist, David Anthony Burke's affidavit would be laminated at the top of the folder, in a plastic sleeve, with tabs. Now let me zoom out. Because there's a larger cultural pattern buried inside this case. Every one of us knew a David. Every one of us went to a high school where there was that one older guy who hung around the parking lot at the end of the day, who dated the freshmen, who bought them things, who drove them home, who made himself indispensable to girls whose frontal cortices were still years away from finished development. He wasn't cool. He wasn't a big deal. He was, in the plainest language we have in 2026, a predator. And the reason cases like this keep happening, the reason we have a D4vd, and a Celeste, and an Operation Awesome, is because for decades, we as a culture normalized the older guy-younger girl dynamic as edgy, as romantic, as merely controversial. That framing has to die. It has to die on a hilltop with a wooden stake through it. Every time we winked at it, every time we called it a scandal instead of a crime, we made room for a David to grow up and think Operation Awesome was a viable life plan. Every rock song, every teen movie, every "she was mature for her age" defense, every one of them contributed a brick to the wall D4vd hid behind while he built his spreadsheet. Sources close to the case whisper that this trial, when it fully begins, will pull in expert witnesses on grooming, on developmental psychology, on the neurobiology of adolescent attachment. It will be a masterclass, delivered in the ugliest possible classroom, on how predators construct these traps. Every parent watching should sit their kids down and watch it with them. Not to traumatize them. To arm them. The next David is already out there, right now, downloading the same playbook, and the only firewall between him and the next Celeste is a properly briefed 13-year-old with a properly briefed parent. Back to the texts. Because we're not done. D4vd, allegedly, tells Celeste at one point that they need to record everything they do for the times they are apart. Record everything. Like we used to. Like we used to. In that phrase, like we used to, you hear the entire timeline collapse. Like we used to implies a beginning. It implies a first time. It implies a duration long enough to have a nostalgic reference point. When you cross-reference that phrase with the coroner's estimated date of death in April 2025, and with the earliest known intersection of David and Celeste, which some accounts trace as far back as 2022, when she was reportedly 11 or 12 years old, you begin to understand that Operation Awesome was not a Valentine's Day impulse. It was the endgame of a multi-year, multi-phase, multi-witness project. 11. Or 12. Let those numbers hang in the air. Because those numbers are the difference between a criminal case and a civilizational failure. That is not romance. That is not a mistake. That is a system. Buckle in, because now I have to address the money. Throughout these texts, David references a new business credit card approval. He calls it another business credit card approval for us to use. Us. Us. He is, allegedly, treating this child as a co-authorized user on a corporate line of credit, purchasing clothes, food, jewelry, and, critically, labeling them as tax-deductible business expenses in the state of California. Which means, folks, that somewhere in the state's franchise tax board records, there is a filed business return that lists purchases made explicitly for the benefit of a 14-year-old runaway, and the very act of filing that return under ordinary and necessary business expense is, all by itself, a separate criminal offense. Wire fraud. Tax fraud. Money laundering in the third degree, depending on which prosecutor draws the case. The homicide charge is only the headline. The financial charges are the underline. And the federal charges are the footnote that keeps him locked up even if a state appeal ever succeeds. Here's where the internet speculation gets sharper, and honestly, more plausible, with every leaked message. There is a growing theory, whispered in the darker corners of the case file discussion channels, that Celeste knew. She knew about the videos. She knew about the credit cards. She knew about the tax filings. She knew, in the way only a child in love with the man ruining her life can know, half aware, half in denial, half convinced that as long as he kept promising Italy, it would all work out. And that knowledge, that leverage, is, I believe, the exact reason D4vd's affections cooled by mid-2025. Because you can't groom a child forever. Eventually, the child becomes an adolescent. Eventually, the adolescent becomes a witness. Eventually, the witness becomes a liability. When D4vd, allegedly, began spending time with Asia Collins, with Jason the One, with Neo, with women his own age, women who would never send him a text saying, "I miss you" like we used to, because they had zero incentive to say anything of the kind, Celeste became inconvenient. Inconvenient in a way that, allegedly, according to the prosecution's theory of the case, ended with her body in the trunk of a Tesla in a Hollywood impound lot. Folks, that is the through line. That is the motive. That is the arc that turns a horror story into a homicide case. Not a moment of passion. Not a fight gone wrong. A calculated cleanup of a witness who was aging out of usefulness and aging into leverage. Every homicide detective in California will tell you that the vast majority of murder cases they close are not the crimes of strangers. They are the crimes of proximity. They are the crimes of intimacy soured into inconvenience. Celeste's case fits that template with a precision that will haunt the trial transcripts for decades. Sources close to the case whisper, and I want to be extremely careful with the phrasing, that additional DNA on the interior of the vehicle traces to at least 3 unidentified individuals beyond David and Celeste. 3. That number matters. That number implies that either the transport of the body was not a solo operation, or that the vehicle had been used, at various points in the months prior, by additional parties who may now be looking down the barrel of accessory after-the-fact charges. Once accessory charges start landing, folks, the flipping begins. Someone in that circle is going to cut a deal. Someone is going to sit in a proffer room and hand the district attorney a decade-long timeline in exchange for a reduced sentence. That is the way these cases always end. Someone always talks. Someone always writes their own story before the state writes it for them. My money, if I had to place it, is on Sheldon. Labor flips faster than talent every single time. Now, hold that thought, because I want to shift to something mainstream coverage is completely missing. D4vd's music. His discography. The Fortnite anthem that made him a household name. The album that dropped, allegedly, 2 days after the coroner's estimated date of Celeste's death. Because if you go back and re-listen to that album now, with the timeline in front of you, with the leaked texts in front of you, with the words, like we used to, ringing in your ears, you will hear things you did not hear the first time. You will hear love songs that are, in retrospect, confessions. You will hear lyrics about running away, about someone waiting for him in a place the world can't find, about, she's my forever, phrases that sound very different when you know that she was 14. There is an argument, and I'll leave this argument here for you to decide, that David Anthony Burke's entire artistic output for the past 3 years has been a coded love letter to Celeste Rivas Hernandez, and every stream, every download, every playlist ad, every Fortnite emote sync, was, unwittingly, a monetization of that letter. If that argument holds up in court, expect civil suits from Celeste's family that will drain every dollar D4vd ever earned from Sony, from Interscope, from Epic Games, from Spotify, from Apple Music, from every platform that ever hosted a bite of his catalog. The Son of Sam laws in California exist specifically for this reason, and D4vd's back catalog is about to be the biggest test case those statutes have seen in a generation. The financial reckoning on this case is going to be historic. Historic in a way we have not seen since the Weinstein estate collapsed. Historic in a way that will set precedent for every underage grooming artist case that comes after. Historic in a way that will force every label, every streaming platform, every gaming company to install actual age verification protocols on the artists they sign, because the exposure of not doing so is now, thanks to D4vd, calculable in 9 figures. We're rounding the corner, but I have to hit one more layer before we close. The courtroom sketches don't just show David Anthony Burke. They show his legal team. And if you zoom in on those sketches, you'll see body language of your own to read. You'll see a defense attorney whose pen is not moving. You'll see a co-counsel whose eyes keep drifting to the ceiling. You'll see the whispered exchanges between lawyer and client that stop mid-sentence because there is nothing left to strategize. When a legal team looks like that, they are not preparing for trial. They are preparing for plea negotiations. They are running the numbers on what kind of custodial sentence they can get without triggering the additional counts. They are, allegedly, already in back-channel conversation with the district attorney's office about whether a full confession, a written, notarized, on-the-record acknowledgement of every single act, could shave a few years off a life-plus consecutive sentence. That is not defense. That is damage control. And it tells you everything you need to know about how confident the prosecution feels about this evidence. Prosecutors who feel weak posture. Prosecutors who feel strong let the defense do the talking. Watch the DA's office over the next 90 days. If you see them going quiet, doing fewer press availabilities, refusing to comment on the record, that's not weakness. That's a team sitting on a full house and waiting for the defense to bet into them. So, folks, let me bring this home. Here's what I think happens next. I think we see additional charges filed within 60 days. I think we see, at minimum, one accessory after-the-fact indictment attached to a person whose name is not currently in the public record. I think we see civil suits filed by Celeste's family against every platform, every label, and every corporate entity that ever profited from D4vd's catalog. I think we see, within the year, a plea agreement that keeps David Anthony Burke off the witness stand and inside a maximum security facility for the rest of his life. And I think we see the entire framework of celebrity-adjacent underage grooming, the older guy younger girl aesthetic that has been tolerated in music, film, and social media for 2 decades, finally, permanently, culturally repudiated. Because if there is one silver lining, and it is thin, and it is fragile, and it is bought with the life of a child who never got to see 15, it is that this case is loud enough, and documented enough, and self-incriminating enough, that no reasonable person in the industry will ever look the other way again. No manager will explain it away. No PR firm will spin it. No fan base will defend it. The evidence is not a rumor. The evidence is a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet is on the record. Once a spreadsheet is on the record, it does not care about your streaming numbers, your fan edits, your Spotify Wrapped, or your TikTok apologists. A spreadsheet is a chess piece the defense cannot move. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 14. She should be at a friend's house tonight, arguing about a Netflix show, texting people her own age about people her own age. Instead, her name is on a docket. Her body was found in the trunk of a car registered to a man who wrote his own confession into an iPhone and sent it, willingly, into the hands of a state that does not lose these cases. She should have had a 15th birthday. She should have had a first prom. She should have had a graduation, a first job, a first apartment, a first argument with her mother about coming home too late from an actual, age-appropriate date with an actual, age-appropriate boy. Every one of those milestones was stolen. And the man who stole them wrote the receipt on his own phone. David Anthony Burke, D4vd, will spend the rest of his life inside a concrete rectangle. And every time D4vd closes his eyes, the last thing he will see, allegedly, is not Celeste's face. It is the little glowing rectangle in his own hand, showing him the message he typed at 11:47 p.m., the message that said, Operation Awesome, the message that ended his life on the same day it ended hers. That is not a metaphor. That is a coordinates ping. That is the exact instant a music career, a fandom, a discography, a Fortnite deal, a label contract, and a human soul all detonated simultaneously, and D4vd, blissfully, obliviously, catastrophically, pressed send. So, the jury is you. Slide your verdict into the comments. Was Operation Awesome the moment David Anthony Burke betrayed himself, or was it the moment he was always going to betray himself, and it just happened to be spelled out in text form? Predator with a beat, or monster who wrote his own confession? Pick a lane. Write it below. And if this breakdown gave you the timeline you couldn't find anywhere else, subscribe, because the next installment covers the 3 unidentified DNA profiles from the Tesla, and folks, that one is going to shake the internet even harder than this one did. I've got names. I've got connections. I've got a chart that walks the DNA profiles through the timeline of D4vd's known associates, and by the time I publish it, at least one of those 3 unidentified profiles will have a face attached to it. Stay safe. Watch your kids. Check the older friends. Check the DMs, check the older friends of the older friends. And if you know a David, say something. Because the difference between a Celeste who lives to see 15 and a Celeste whose name lives only on a docket is, and always has been, one adult in the room who refused to look away. Be that adult. Be the checkpoint that finally holds. Because Celeste Rivas Hernandez cannot come back, but the next Celeste, the one who is 14 tonight, the one who is texting a David tonight, the one who is one Valentine's Day away from her own Operation Awesome, that Celeste is still savable, and she is savable only if we finally, collectively, decide to see her. Peace.